Hello, I'm Sakshi Mandwal and our subject expert is Mr. Atul Sinha, lecturer, graphics and animation from AJK MCRC, Jamia Millia Islamia. In today's session, we are going to concentrate on the principles of animation. Many of the principles of traditional animation were developed in the 1930s at the Walt Disney Studios. These principles were developed to make animation, especially character animation, more realistic and entertaining. But before we start discussing about the principles of motion, it is important to understand the laws of motion. Laws of motion. Anyone involved in animation needs to understand how objects move. These principles were developed a couple of years ago by Sir Isaac Newton. He had three fundamental laws of motion. Now we are going to go through these and see how they apply on animation. Newton's first law of motion, in his own words, was: a body persists in a state of being at rest or moving uniformly straight forward, except insofar as it is compelled to change its state by force impressed. Now that's 17th century English. Let's go ahead and state it in plain English. Now the first part is: an object that is not moving will remain still until a force acts upon it. The second part is: an object that is moving will not change its velocity until a force acts upon it. Now the fundamental point of this is that you need a force to put something in motion. Now let's take a look at this in practice. Let's assume we have a ball at rest. In order to get it moving, we need to apply a force to make it move. Now when a force is applied, it starts moving. Now the second part is that an object that is moving will not change its velocity until a force acts upon it. So when an object is moving with no force applied, it will move at an equal distance per unit of time. Once we apply a force is applied, the path will change. So it will not change its velocity or its direction until a force is applied. So an object will stay in motion until a force is applied, and it will remain stationary until a force is applied. So we can conclude that forces create motion. Newton's second law of motion is mass of objects and its acceleration. The change of momentum of a body is proportional to the impulse impressed on the body and happens along the straight line on which that impulse is impressed. Now in regular English, it means a force applied to an object will accelerate it in a straight line. An equation to it, F is equal to ma. Force equals mass times acceleration. With that equation, we can derive two additional points that are 1. More force accelerates the same mass faster, and 2. More mass requires more force for the same acceleration.
In this example, a 3D character represents a pulling force on a 50 kilogram mass. Using his full strength, he has no trouble accelerating the object in the direction of his pulling force. If the mass is doubled and we want to accelerate it at the same rate, we must also double the force. Our character, however, is already pulling at his full strength. So what happens? He can only accelerate the object at half the rate as illustrated by his slower pace. This relationship between force, mass, and acceleration is the source of one of the most important equations in physics. Force equals mass times acceleration.
So if something is bigger, it will require more force to move it. Or if you put more force on something, we will accelerate it faster. Amount of acceleration depends upon the mass of the object. So it indicates the weight of the object or how heavy it is, which is very important in animation, as a heavier character will move differently from a slimmer or lighter character. Only time an object will accelerate or deaccelerate is when a force is applied, and that force will accelerate or deaccelerate that mass according to how heavy it is. Newton's third law of motion concerns how objects interact with each other, how they can transmit forces from one to the other. In Newton's words, to every action there is always an opposite equal reaction, or the mutual actions of the two bodies upon each other are always equal and directed to contrary paths. To put it in simpler English, it means for any force there is always an equal and opposite reaction, or some people say for every action there is an opposite and equal reaction. When an object pushes another object, it gets pushed back in the opposite direction in equal amount. So, if a hand pushes a ball, as the hand gets in contact with the ball, they will push against each other. And if the ball is heavier, the hand will require more force to push it. Now, to overcome friction, the hand will have to come with more force from a distance for the ball to get moving. Now, if we take the bouncing ball example, when the ball hits the ground, we have the opposite reaction, as the ground pushes it back in the opposite direction and gravitation brings it down. This continues until the momentum comes to a halt. So that's a very quick lesson in physics about the laws of motion. Now these laws apply to a great deal on character animation to make the motion more lifelike and convincing. Animation principles are the laws of motion as they apply to animation. Or, in other words, Newton's laws transmitted for animators. Now, over the further course of this lesson, we will look into these principles and see how they are used in animation. To refine the basic animation techniques that had been in use from the earliest days of animation, animators at Walt Disney Productions developed some terms and techniques. These were taught and practiced as if they were the rules of the trade. These became the fundamental principles of traditional animation world over. These 12 basic principles of animation were introduced by the Disney animators Ollie Johnston and Frank Thomas in their 1981 book, The Illusion of Life, Disney Animation. The book and its principles have become generally adopted and have been referred to as the Bible of the industry. These 12 principles of animation are: number 1, squash and stretch; number 2, anticipation; number 3, staging; number 4, straight ahead action and pose to pose; number 5, follow through and overlapping action; number 6, slow in and slow out; number 7, arcs; number 8, secondary action; number 9, timing; number 10, exaggeration; number 11, solid drawing; and finally number 12, appeal. It applies the illusion of weight to the character. One of the most important principles discovered was squash and stretch. By applying this principle to our animation, we can give it a sense of weight and flexibility. Though while stretching and squashing an object, we have to remember to maintain the consistency of its volume. Often in animation, this particular principle is exaggerated to give it a more comical look. It can be applied to objects like bouncing balls, biceps, musculature of a human face, and body weight of a person walking or performing an One of the most important points to keep in mind while applying this principle is to maintain the overall mass or volume of the character or the object while animating. Two of the best examples to illustrate these principles are ball bounce and the famous half-filled flour sack. These two examples illustrate that attitude can be easily achieved with the simplest of shapes too. Motion that precedes main motion. This movement prepares the viewers for a major action the character is about to perform, such as starting to run, jump, or change expression. A dancer not just leaps off the floor. A backward movement occurs before the forward action is executed. The backward movement is anticipation. Almost all real action has major or minor earnest, such as a pyther's wind-up or a golfer's backswing. It gives body parts more momentum. As you can see, anticipation is very important. In one respect, it's a natural part of motion in order to get enough momentum and speed to do certain things. For example, to hit a ball with a cricket bat. On the other hand, it's a great dramatic device as it allows you to direct the eyes of the audience. So by anticipating an action, the audience will have their eyes when the actual action occurs. So it's important for two reasons. One is to create natural motion, and two is to direct the audience's eyes to that motion. A pose or action should clearly communicate to the audience the attitude, mood, reaction, or idea of the character, as it should relate to the story and continuation of the storyline. The effective use of long, medium, or close-up shots, as well as camera angles, also help in telling the story. There is a limited amount of time in a film, so each sequence, scene, and frame of film must relate to the overall story. Staging directs the audience attention to the idea being told. Care must be taken in background design so it isn't obscuring the animation or competing with it due to excess detail behind the animation. Straight ahead animation starts at the first drawing and works drawing to the end of a scene. You can lose size, volume, and magnitude with this method, but it does have freshness. Fast, wild action scenes are done this way. Pose to pose is more planned out with key drawings done at intervals throughout the scene. Size, volumes, and proportions are controlled better this way, as is the action. This is actually based on Newton's law that objects tend to stay at rest and it creates what is called as drag. Some objects stay in motion even when primary objects stop. When the main body of the character stops, all other parts continue to catch up to the main mass of the character. Nothing stops all at once. This is follow-through. Overlapping action is when the character changes direction while his clothes or hair continues forward. The character is going in a new direction to follow a number of frames later by his clothes in the new direction. In features, this type of action is done more subtly. So as you animate your characters, remember to pay attention to drag and follow through joint of your character. in and slow out is basically a restatement of Newton's second law of motion. F is equal to ma, that objects accelerate and deaccelerate as they move in, or in animation lingo, slow in and slow out will smooth out the animation. As action starts, we have more drawings near the starting pose, one or two in the middle, and more drawings near the next pose. Fewer drawings make the action faster and more drawings make the action slower. Slow ins and slow outs soften the action, making it more lifelike. It overall adds to the realism of the movement. Remember to use it in all the motions in your character animation. The concept of arcs is very important. It basically means that natural motion follows an arc. Usually, only mechanical objects move in a straight line. All actions with few follow an arc or slightly circular path. This is especially true of the human figure and the action of animals. Arcs give animation a more natural action and a better flow. Think of natural movements in terms of a pendulum swinging. All arm movement, head turns, and even eye movements are executed on arcs. The exception to this principle is the mechanical movement, which typically moves in straight lines. Usually, in computer animation, in-betweens are done by computer in a typical straight line, so one has to be careful about correcting it. This action adds to and enriches the main action and adds more dimension to the character animation. Supplementing and or reinforcing the main action. The possibility of dialogue being delivered at the same time with tilts and turns of the head to accentuate the walk and dialogue, but not so much as to distract from the walk action. All of these actions should work together in support of one another. Think of the walk as a primary action and arm swings, head bounce, and all other actions of the body as secondary or supporting action. Skill in timing comes best with experience and personal experimentation, using the trial and error method in refining technique. The basics are: more drawings make the action slow and smooth. Fewer drawings make the action faster and crisper. A variety of slow and fast timing within a seed adds texture and interest to the movement. Timing can also be used differently to communicate different emotions. It can be comic or theatrical depending on the way used. Exaggeration is not distortion of a drawing or extremely broad, violent action all the time. It's like a sketch of facial features, expressions, poses, attitudes, and actions. Action traced from live action film can be accurate but stiff and mechanical. Exaggeration in a walk or an eye movement or even a head turn will give your film more appeal. The classical definition of exaggeration employed by Disney was to remain true to reality just presenting it in a wilder, more extreme form. But one needs to strike a balance of these elements to avoid confusion. The basic principles of drawing form, weight, volume, solidity, and the illusion of three dimensions apply to animation as it does to academic drawing. The way you draw cartoons, you draw in the classical sense using pencil sketches and drawings for reproduction of life. You transform these colors and movement, giving the characters the illusion of 3 and 4 dimensional life. 3-dimensional is movement in space. The 4th dimension is movement in time. Appealing animation does not mean just being cute and cuddly. All characters have to appeal, whether they're heroic, villainous, comic, or cute. Appeal, as you will use it, includes as easy to read design, clear drawing, and personality development that will capture and involve the audience's interest. Like all forms of storytelling, the feature has to appeal to the mind as well as to the eye. Though these principles were developed for traditional 2D animation in 1930s, but these can be applied to 3D computer-based animations too. Though modern computer animators do not need to draw at all, other than rough scribbles and thumbnail drawings, but their work can still benefit greatly by understanding these fundamental principles. Thank you for being with us. Hope you all had a great learning experience.